My guest today is Alex Winter. He's a filmmaker, producer, writer, and actor. Some of you may have seen him in a film of a different nature, but today we are talking about a film that is showing here at the San Francisco International Film Festival.
It's called The Silk Road.
Silk Road.
A billion-dollar online marketplace for illegal
it's like
drugs.
eBay for drugs.
The elusive ringleader known as
the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Who is the Dread Pirate Roberts? Authorities say they have their guy.
29-year-old Ross Ulbricht.
Is he the man they call DPR?
Plenty of evidence suggests that he was involved in the Silk Road. They seized his laptop while he was logged in. But I interviewed the Dread Pirate Roberts. The first thing he told me was that there are multiple Dread Pirate Roberts.
There was more than one person?
At least two other people, if not three.
There's a huge dispute that he could have done what he did.
He's not the guy that I'm reading about.
People don't have a clue who Ross really is.
I know, I'm his mother. I'm going to say good things about Ross.
Nothing has been proven at all. How did you find the server? They're not saying.
The film is called The Deep Web. And I'm going to have Alex explain what the deep web is.
The deep web refers to all of the unindexed content online. So it's literally all the banking data, administrative code, all the things that are moving around on the internet that we don't see and that Google doesn't pick up or index. It's vast. It's a lot bigger than the visible surface web by many, many times. And then there's an area within the deep web called the darknet. And what happened is that cryptographers and coders and hackers have sort of created a space within the deep web where they can communicate with each other privately and anonymously. And that's mostly used by government agencies. Journalists use it to protect their sources. Dissidents use it to communicate within totalitarian regimes. People use it for outreach, different types of communication where you want privacy. People even use it to communicate with each other so that their records aren't public, so they don't get hacked. But there's also these markets that appear there, and one of them, the biggest one, was called the Silk Road, and it came online in 2011. It was shut down and seized by the government in 2013, and that mostly trafficked in drugs. So people were buying and selling drugs on the Silk Road using a cryptocurrency, a digital currency called Bitcoin that is capable of being anonymized, meaning you can take Bitcoin and hide who the user is. So that was shut down by the federal government, and then they made an arrest here in San Francisco of a young man named Ross Ulbricht, who they claimed was the owner and operator of this site. And that's primarily what the film is about.
So on the surface, it seems like it's a film about Silk Road and the language they use, TOR, the folks use in this dark net, and Bitcoin, which you called as a virtual currency, which is anonymized, but can also be tracked.
Completely.
Yeah, it can also be tracked. Yeah. And you're talking about Ross and his role in the Silk Road. Before we go to Ross, let's just briefly talk about the Silk Road itself. Was it primarily drugs, or were there other things that were being bought and sold in this underground marketplace called the Silk Road?
The Silk Road was a marketplace for anything. The whole point of it was that you could create a username, you could get a Bitcoin account, you could anonymize that account, and you would then be able to buy and sell whatever you wanted privately and anonymously. There were, at least 1 million people using this market. There's a lot all over the world. It was predominantly the vast majority of what was being bought and sold on the Silk Road was drugs of all stripes. For the most part, while the Silk Road was active, it was mostly marijuana and softer drugs, and then there were harder drugs that were also for sale on the Silk Road. So it really ran the gamut. You have this new technology that's very provocative and disruptive. It's a centralized service, which means it's got one central point of control, so you can seize that one point of control. And then many copycat sites come in its wake. And then eventually you'll have decentralized marketplaces. So that's sort of the world we're in now. So the Silk Road was closed down in 2013, but many, many copycats have appeared in its wake. And now we're headed towards decentralized markets. So it's all going to keep going.
You mentioned Ross Ulbricht, and he is the gentleman who is supposedly who supposedly created Silk Road, and he's actually in jail now, standing trial. And in the film, you show us the story of Ross, this young kid from Austin, Texas, grew up in a very happy family, bright kid, and then something happened when he went to graduate school, and he decided to embrace this Austrian school of economic philosophy, which has got this strong libertarian streak in it. Tell us a little bit about Ross. What did you discover, and why is he in jail? Do you think he was the guy that was operating Silk Road when he... was it the FBI that caught him here in a local library in San Francisco?
To me, the story was really about the unknowable. The story was really about when you're dealing with an anonymous marketplace in a hidden corner of the internet with fictitious usernames, with an anonymized cryptocurrency, so you can't actually, you don't know who you're dealing with, where the market was run by users that didn't know each other. They were all using fictitious names, where the law enforcement also were using fictitious names and going undercover, where you didn't really know exactly what the law enforcement people were doing either. There's a lot of unknowns. And to me, what was fascinating about this story was looking at it without trying to leap to conclusions one way or the other, that either Ross is a martyr and a hero, as many people have painted him, or as sort of predominantly as he's been painted in the press, he's some kind of monster, hacker, drug overlord. And to me, I was interested in saying, okay, here's what we do know, here's what we don't know, here's how this world works, here's what the motives were for creating this world, and that's as much as we know, right? So I think my discoveries were more about the conclusions that people were willing to leap to in all directions, the sort of the way in which Ross almost got turned into a litmus test or a Rorschach test. You could apply whatever you wanted to this person because nobody really knew who he was, right? And, the family has a very specific perspective because they know him really well and they were with him all the time right up until just before he got arrested. There are people within the Silk Road that knew the guy who ran the Silk Road. They don't know whether it was Ross or not. And they have a very specific perspective. Law enforcement has a very specific perspective. So the film is really about all of these fractured perspectives and what do they add up to and how do you ever get a clear sense of what's going on when you're dealing with so many unknowns.
This case is a very interesting case. It's like an onion. Every time you think you've got to the core of the onion, there's yet another layer.
Yeah.
And you said you mentioned unknowns. There are still some unknowns in the story, and there are some very interesting twists that have come about where it looks like the intelligence community itself may have muddied the water a bit?
Yeah, what came out shortly after the trial was that the two lead investigators for the Baltimore operation, the Silk Road operation, law enforcement, one from the DEA and one from the Secret Service, were corrupt and had created fictitious usernames that their own departments didn't know about. They were stealing money, Bitcoin, from the Silk Road, putting it into personal accounts. They were creating murder-for-hire schemes. They basically went rogue. So they have been indicted, and these are alleged charges, and that all will come out in some form of trial for them, down the road. But I think it helps to further illustrate what I kind of knew all along, which is that there's just a lot more to this story than we've heard, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult to actually know exactly what happened. So there's a lot of jumping to conclusions. There's a lot of people just saying, well, we're just going to decide the story is this. And then every time they do that, the goalposts move. And you realize, no, the story is actually wider than just this. And you can't just put your arms around it. There's going to be more, and there's going to be more, and there's going to be more. And to me, that's the whole point. You mentioned an onion, and the story is like an onion. And TOR, one of the ways you get into the dark net is the TOR stands for the onion router. And that's the whole point. The whole point of privacy and anonymity is to wrap yourself, your identity, in so many layers that it's very difficult to get through all those layers to who you are. And that's the battle that law enforcement is currently waging against these encryption and privacy tools. But the problem, of course, is that a lock is built to work on purpose. And, you have a lock on your front door. And the tumbler in that lock is effective. It's been engineered to not work unless you have the key. So we have to ask ourselves the question of are we willing to not have locks on our door? And are we willing to not have doors? And the Silk Road case, it impacts a lot of different issues, constitutional issues, and just basic questions about the digital age, trying federal crime cases in the digital age, what are citizens' rights for search and seizure in the digital age, what are our basic privacy should we expect to have for ourselves moving forward in this age? And this case really hits on all of those before you even get to the bigger questions of the drug war and how the drug war is being prosecuted and whether the internet doesn't have the capability on some level of driving policy that may help reform some draconian laws around drugs.
Whether privacy really is a myth. What do you think?
I don't think that privacy is a myth. I think that privacy is a basic human right. I think that it's worth fighting for. I think that it's worth creating encryption tools for. I think that it's worth educating yourself about so that you can maintain your privacy. I think that to just give up and just sit in the sand and resign yourself to this new landscape, in which all of your personal information, all of your photographs, all of your private data is readily accessible by either corporations that want to advertise to you, or law enforcement that wants to spy on you, or hackers that want to attack your systems or take your information. I think that's not the right response. I think that as a society, as a civilization, we are at a crossroads, a big one. We're moving from the industrial age into the digital age, the technological age, and it's going to be a very slow, very painful, bloody process. There's going to be a lot of casualties in that process. But privacy should not be one of those casualties. So we have to, as a culture, say, okay, this may be confusing to me, this may be unpalatable to me, but I have to learn and educate myself about how these things work, and I have to be a little more open-minded about the people out there that are fighting for my rights to privacy.
What do you think is going to happen to Ross Ulbricht?
Ross's original sentencing date was May 15th, and the defense recently had that moved a couple weeks. So it's now the end of May. So I think May 29th is his sentencing. He is facing a maximum sentence of life in prison. I think the minimum he would get at this point is 20 years, from what I understand of the law. I don't think anyone knows exactly what he's going to get. I think that the historically speaking, in criminal trials of this nature, especially involving the drug war, they tend to go for full weight, which is the maximum. They're playing to win, and you don't go to trial with a federal case unless you really want to win and make a statement. I think that the internet and its power, drugs aside, the idea that since Napster there have been growing online communities that are beyond the law, where people want to commune privately, anonymously. They want to be able to sort of do what they want to do on the internet. I think it's very threatening. So now that you have digital currency, whether it's Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, and these anonymizing tools like Tor and other things, services that are not going away. And if they break Tor, then they'll create something. They're already creating new ways to get into the darknet. So, this is not. This is part of this evolution I'm talking about. This is part of this technological paradigm shift that's going on, and you cannot stop this evolution. So the great possibility is that they will make an example of Ross and really hit him hard, But there's really no way to know, and maybe they will be more lenient since there weren't, he wasn't in the end indicted for murder for hire. There's a lot we don't know. The corruption of these agents. I think if you're really going to put away somebody for the rest of their life, like that's it. 29, 30 years old, you're done. You're never coming out of jail again ever. I think it really is incumbent upon you to be. The onus is on the court to really prove that he was a drug pin that deserves to be in jail for the rest of his life.
So he was indicted on 7 charges, and drugs is something that you've mentioned more than once. There may be folks out there wondering, this guy created the Silk Road, which is a marketplace. Why is he being indicted for drug charges?
So here's what happened. So the charge is that Ross is a character called the Dread Pirate Roberts. The Dread Pirate Roberts was the fictitious username of the entity that took credit for running and controlling the Silk Road. We don't know whether there was just one of these or not. There could have been many people using the Dread Pirate Roberts account. It could have really just been a front-end kind of facade for whoever was running the site. And the site was definitely run by a lot of people. That much we know. And it's just common sense. You can't run you can't scale an online business this gigantic by yourself. Jeff Bezos at Amazon needed some help. But he's convicted. Ross has been convicted of being the Dread Pirate Roberts. So Ross claims that he built the Silk Road as an economic experiment, as he talked about in his writing. He wanted to combine Bitcoin and Tor to create this sort of, Misesian, this libertarian free market on the internet. And then he bailed out. And then it took off and it became what it became. And someone else, because the Dread Pirate Roberts didn't appear until a year after the Silk Road went online. Someone else took this name, and the prosecution claims that's not true. They claim that Ross is the Dread Pirate Roberts, that he ran the site for its entire existence. So where the drugs come in is whoever was Dread Pirate Roberts was very aware that they were controlling a market that was mostly being used by people who were buying and selling drugs. So that's a facilitating incrimination, basically, or indictment. You have the intent to aid the mass movement of drugs. So if we accept that Ross is the Dread Pirate Roberts and that Ross was intently constructing and running a marketplace that was its sole purpose, according to the manifestos on the Silk Road, were to combat the drug war, to reduce harm and violence in the drug trade, then that's the claim. That then you're a drug kingpin and you're running this thing and you're facilitating the mass movement and exchange of drugs. So that's where the drugs come in. And to be fair, that's what Ross was convicted of in this trial. He was convicted of being the Dread Pirate Roberts and facilitating.
One of the topics that you touch upon in this film is Fourth Amendment. Tell us about Fourth Amendment and what is it that you're trying to show us through your film about what could happen to Fourth Amendment?
The Fourth Amendment is search and seizure. It's essentially the privacy amendment, and it's a very, very important amendment. And it's to be fair to people who argue on the other side. I think it was the FBI director recently, and Louis Freeh years ago very famously came out staunchly against encryption and people protecting their or barriering themselves with technology. So there's been kind of a debate already that law enforcement says, look, we really need you we need backdoors to get into your phone, to get into your computer so that we can protect you from bad actors, terrorists, whatever. There's a counter debate that, well, just like I have a door at my house that you can't enter without a warrant, the same goes for my technology. You can't enter my technology without a warrant. You can't surveil all of my information so that if I'm doing something bad, you're just like you can't send an FBI agent to come sit in my living room so that if I do something wrong, he's already there and it's easier for him to apprehend me. It's essentially what they're saying. So that's the debate. And the concern around the Silk Road case is twofold. One is we don't know how the FBI found the Silk Road servers, which were in a Tor hidden service, which is unfindable. So did they hack Tor, which is against the law? There's been no clear warrant for seizing that server, which, according to the Fourth Amendment, there has to be. And the FBI claimed they did it all via, upstanding means, but we don't know what those means are. And the explanations that have been put forth don't make a whole lot of sense. So there's kind of two issues going on, and I think they kind of bundle, because I think what it says is my position. A lot of people have different positions. Some people say the feds absolutely broke the law. Some people say no, they absolutely didn't. And from where I sit, the fact that we're not able to have the conversation, the fact that we've never had that moment where we get a really clear-cut understanding about what happened here, that is the problem. Because there's a sort of a pushback from the people who don't want us to have privacy. We're like, look, we're law enforcement. You don't get to know how we do what we're doing. Just trust that we're doing it right and we're catching bad guys. Now go back to your home. And that's not acceptable, because we are entering an age where we're constantly pushing back against laws that need to be adapted. The Supreme Court recently ruled that police officers can't search and seize the data on your cell phone without a warrant. That went all the way to the Supreme Court, right? So we need to adapt our laws around the digital age. And they are Byzantine. These laws were constructed long before there was technology on one side. And not only that, but the law, as we saw in the Aaron Swartz case and many other cases, Barrett Brown, Jeremy Hammond, the law for infractions in the digital space are much more severe than they are for those same infractions in the physical space. Someone could get put away for 100 years for posting a hyperlink. So there's a lot that's wrong with policy. There's a lot that's missing from how laws are function in the digital age, and there's a lot of reform, and there's a lot of law writing that needs to happen, and it's hard for that to happen if we're not allowed to have the conversation.
So what are the challenges that the legal community are facing, and how are they adapting to it and changing these laws that need to happen, like you point out?
What's going on is education, and it is happening, and there are really terrible things that can happen online. I mean, you have to look at the internet as any environment, right? And this is where people go wrong. In America, laws don't work that way, right? You're innocent until proven guilty, as you should be. The internet's exactly the same. Full stop. The darknet is the same. Most people on the darknet are not committing crimes. They're not there for nefarious purposes, and they shouldn't be treated as criminals. They shouldn't be demonized. Now, that may make it harder, if you're law enforcement, to police that space, because it's harder to get in. It's harder to infiltrate. It's harder to find out who's doing what. But the reality of it is you don't have the right to then say, you're all criminals, and we're just going to put our arms around all of you, and we'll slowly let each one of you out as we determine that you're okay. As unpleasant as that is, as unpalatable as it is incumbent upon law enforcement, the government, corporations, Google, Facebook, whomever, to start from the perspective of protecting the innocent until proven guilty civilian, whether that civilian is in the physical space or in the digital space. So that requires law enforcement to educate themselves, to catch up to the cryptos, to catch up to and you have to remember the internet was created by the government. So these people are not, ignorant. It's just bureaucratic. It's very big. Some wings of the government are extremely educated, have fantastic ideas about, privacy, and they're not all out to disrupt your privacy and pull your walls down, and the FBI needs to be able to do their job. They need to be able to catch bad guys for sure, right? That's common sense. And so they're getting educated, and there are people within the FBI that are doing cyber work that's phenomenal, especially around the protection of children space, child abuse, child pornography, that area. They've adapted quickly there. They haven't done so well in the drug space, and I think the DEA has some catching up to do. And the drug war itself is such a mess that I think it precludes more fluid movement. So there's a lot of reform that needs to happen, and it's unpleasant, and it's slow, And it means they're afraid that bad guys are going to get away with stuff until they can catch up. But that's just the reality of where we are. And I've spoken to in law enforcement are extremely rational and get it and are educating themselves, and they're doing seminars and they're going to seminars, and they believe that we should have privacy. Because most of the law enforcement that I speak to, just like myself, know that if you pull all the walls down, you're exposing yourself to the bad guys as easily as you're exposing yourself to the good guys. If I have no privacy protection, then I'm going to get hacked over and over and over again. And there's no way for me to protect myself against bad actors who want to get into my data.
How did you go from making Broadway, productions?
I was 9 years old.
Well, you were 9 years old, but you made Broadway productions. And now you're so passionate about technology. What is this pull towards technology?
The reality of it is what I care about is people and global culture and the way we communicate as human beings. And, my interest in the internet was always social. I became very interested in the internet in the mid-'80s. It was the birth of what was called the BBS and Usenet era. And I became very active in that era, very engaged with the online communities there, and felt that I was living through an extraordinary movement. And that the world was about to change dramatically overnight. It hadn't happened yet, but it was coming. The people I was communicating in that space were super interesting. We were talking about philosophy. We were talking about art. We were talking about books. There were drugs there. There were the same things you see in the dark net were all there. There was encrypted email in the late 80s. There were drug markets online in the late 80s. But it was this democratized community. And it was very clear that was going to erupt. So when Napster happened in 98, 99, it was a watershed moment, especially for me, having come from the Usenet era. I did not look at Napster as a music service, much less a piracy service. To me, it was the very first time that what I had experienced as a fairly tech-savvy person, being able to navigate this online terrain, this community, was now in the hands of ordinary citizens. So suddenly, overnight, for the first time in human history, 100 million people were on the same community online at the same time all over the world. It's very hard to understress the significance of that. And yet Napster is looked at, even today, mistakenly, as a music piracy service, which is not what it was and not what it was created for and not what its significance was technologically. For me, it's the people. It's the global change. It's the times that we're living in. To me, how can you not be interested in what's going on? Because everyone not everyone, a lot of people looked at Napster and were like, oh, this is dismissible. Oh, Facebook is dismissible. And then we had the Arab Spring. Then we had WikiLeaks. Then we had Chelsea Manning. Then we had Snowden. And then we had Bitcoin. And then we had the Silk Road. And if people by now don't realize that the world underneath their feet isn't changing, it's already changed. We literally live in a different world than we did 10, 15 years ago. And I think it's so frightening and confusing to most people that they're living in the world that we were in before, and they're kind of tar and feathering this new world or labeling it in all these ways, but they don't really want to call it what it is. But we're already there. We're there already. And as a storyteller, as a person, human being, how can you not find that interesting? So that's what I care about. I couldn't care less about TOR or Bitcoin. I'm not a Bitcoin hedge fund enthusiast. I'm not trading it. I honestly couldn't care less. I really couldn't. I'm interested in people. I'm interested in the way they communicate with each other. I'm interested in the way that they change the world. And right now, the world is changing through technology.